An interesting new conflict gets introduced between the disciples in the Acts of the Apostles. It's not totally new that the disciples would sort of be arguing with one another. It happens a couple of times throughout the Gospels. They're arguing about who will be the most important, who will sit at Jesus' right hand. But those are all kind of dumb arguments. We get into what's actually a real and kind of important argument in the Acts of the Apostles. And it's between these folks who think that what Jesus represents is the next step in the story that began in Adam and Eve, but that story is limited to the children of Abraham, to the tribes of Israel. That what Jesus really is a fulfillment of the story that Moses began, a fulfillment of that law, and a continuation of that narrative. And so the people Jesus is here for, or was here for, are just the Jewish people. And on the other hand, you have a group of the disciples who go, that's too small of thinking. Jesus was here for everybody, for all of these people who had never heard God's will or word before, who'd never experienced it. Jesus is bigger than just the people of Israel. And throughout the early chapters of the Acts of the Apostles, you sort of go back and forth on this debate for a while. Paul originally is on one side, and Peter's kind of on the other. Peter's on this side that's unsure about expanding the mission and ministry of God. And then all of a sudden, Peter starts preaching to the Gentiles. And people come to him and they go, "What are you doing?" Unlike in the Gospels, this isn't a group of antagonists. These aren't the bad guys. These aren't the people who are against the mission of the church. Rather, these are good and faithful believers who come and go, "Hey man, you seem to be betraying everything that we believe in. Why are you doing this?" And Peter tells them a story. You see, it's easy to see why these people were frustrated. The people of Israel had a pretty good thing going. They may have been occupied at the time by the Romans, and sure, for a while they were in exile off in Babylon, but at a fundamental level, they knew the deep truth. They had received the law. They knew how to live righteously. It was all there, written down. If you do this and this and this, you will be considered righteous in the eyes of God. And if there wasn't something particular written down about some circumstance that had arisen since the law was written, then they had really smart people who would go and figure out what God intended for them in that circumstance. And so as long as they followed all the rules, as long as they followed the codes, as long as they followed the law, they would be righteous. And here comes Peter, suddenly willing to preach to a bunch of people who don't care about the law at all. This week's reading made me think of two very different art pieces. One kind of from my childhood and one that I was obsessed with in high school. The second is the movie The Matrix. I thought of that great scene when Neo, the main character, who's been trapped inside the Matrix his whole life, is finally freed, and he's talking with Morpheus. Morpheus is the leader of this sort of group of rebels, and is convinced that Neo is the prophesied Messiah who they've been waiting on, the one. And Neo says to Morpheus, "Are you saying that when I'm finished, when I'm trained, I'll be able to dodge bullets?" And Morpheus responds, "No, I'm saying when you're ready, you won't need to." Neo is consumed by what I'll refer to as the deep magic. Morpheus is talking about the deeper magic. That term of deep and deeper comes from the other piece of art, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. In that story, that group of English children end up in Narnia, and Aslan trades his life for the woe-begotten Edmund, who is a bad kid and has done bad things and now has to pay with his life But Aslan quotes to the White Queen the deep magic from the dawn of time, the rules of creation, the way the world works, which is that if he chooses, Aslan can offer up his life for the life of a bad kid. This is exactly what the queen has always wanted, so she accepts, puts Aslan up on the stone altar and stabs him in the heart, and he dies. All of her minions leave with her as they go off to conquer the rest of Narnia, and 2 children are left to weep at the table. And then suddenly, the table breaks. The lion's body is gone. And in a moment, Aslan is reborn. When the children ask how this could happen, he tells them, "The witch knew of the deep magic from the dawn of time, but I knew of the deeper magic from before the dawn of time." The witch knew the rules. Aslan knew the magic. Peter here, I think, in his vision is discovering that while he may have known the rules, Jesus gave them the magic. In our gospel reading, we have this picture of Jesus at the Last Supper. He's at the end of what we call the farewell discourses in John. He's been going on for chapters, sort of recapturing all of his ministry, telling his disciples all of the stories. He washes their feet. He calls out Judas. And then here at the very end, with just him and his 11 friends left in the room, he tells them, "I have one last commandment for you. Love one another as I have loved you." At the end of all things, Jesus reveals to his disciples the deeper magic from before the dawn of time. Love each other. We as human beings are a people obsessed with systems and rules. We would love it if our religion were simpler. If at the core of all of our decisions, God had given us enough guidance that every time we had to make a left or a right, we knew exactly which was the moral and good way to go. If when yes or no were options, we knew that saying yes was the right choice every time. It would be so much simpler if only we had rules and strictures and structures that made it all crystal clear. But the deepest magic doesn't work that way, because it calls us to live lives just like God does, to give up pieces of ourselves to those around us, not just those we love, because that would be too easy, but also those who we dislike, even those whom we hate. God calls us to love one another as he loved us. Not worried about our sinfulness, but worried about his own graciousness. We are a people all too worried about being able to dodge bullets, not aware that if we simply lived into the commandment God called us to, then we wouldn't have to. Love one another as I have loved you. Amen.